A university graduation party at a sprawling mansion should have been the triumphant culmination of Elijah's hard-won academic success. Instead, it became a stage for his deepest humiliation, where a single, clumsy moment laid bare the chasm between his world and that of his wealthy classmates. The laughter and ridicule that followed him out the door fueled an ambition so fierce it would, in just 4 years, transform him into a titan of industry. The very friends who once mocked him now extended another invitation, unaware that the quiet young man they remembered was about to return, not as a guest, but as a ghost of their collective past, ready to claim his moment of truth. If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. Elijah's world was a symphony of competing noises. The relentless clang of the L train overhead, the distant wail of police sirens, the bass thumping from a neighbor's window, it all blended into a familiar rhythmic hum that was both a constant backdrop and a subtle weight on his shoulders. He lived in a 2-story apartment building, painted a faded shade of teal, on a street where chipped asphalt was more common than sidewalk. The air, thick with the smell of exhaust and cheap street food, clung to his clothes and hair, a constant reminder of his roots. Inside, his home was an island of quiet ambition. The apartment he shared with his mother and younger sister was small, a cramped space where every piece of furniture had a story of second-hand life. The couch had a permanent divot from his mother's long nights of worry, and the kitchen table, scarred with generations of homework, arguments and meals, served as his sanctuary. This was where Elijah lived and breathed, where he transformed the chaos outside into a focused, singular drive. His mother, Lena, was the anchor of their small family. She worked 2 jobs, her hands perpetually calloused and her eyes carrying a profound weariness that never quite faded. She was a woman of few words, but her love was a quiet, fierce force. She communicated her pride and her hope for him not with grand speeches, but with the simple act of leaving a warm plate of food on the table, no matter how late he stayed up studying. She had sacrificed everything for him for his chance at something more. It was a debt he could only repay with success. The idea of something more was a concept that had taken root in his mind from an early age. It wasn't just about escaping poverty, it was about proving a point. In their community, success was often measured in small, tangible ways. A new pair of shoes, a slightly better apartment, a car that actually worked. For Elijah, the measure was different. It was the vast, intimidating world beyond his neighborhood, the world of books and ideas and opportunities that felt a million miles away. He found his refuge in the local library, a sturdy brick building that felt like a fortress against the world outside. The smell of old paper and dust was his perfume, and the hushed silence, broken only by the rustle of turning pages, was his favorite melody. The librarian, a stern but kind woman named Mrs. Gable, took notice of the quiet boy who seemed to live among the history and science sections. She fed his hunger with recommendations and unlocked a world he never knew existed. She introduced him to the work of W.E.B. Du Bois and James Baldwin, and suddenly his own struggles had a historical context, a legacy of perseverance that both humbled and inspired him. Elijah's mind was a sponge, soaking up every piece of information he could get his hands on. While other kids were outside playing basketball or video games, he was inside, hunched over his desk, filling notebooks with equations and essays. He tutored younger students for a few dollars, saving every cent to help his mother with groceries or a utility bill. The money wasn't much, but it was his contribution, a small symbol of his growing responsibility. His academic record was spotless, a perfect mosaic of A's and perfect test scores. But grades, he knew, weren't enough. The tuition fees for top universities were staggering, a number so astronomical it felt like a cruel joke. He had a dream of attending Northwestern University, an institution whose prestige felt both tantalizingly close and impossibly far away. He'd seen the brochures, the glossy photos of students strolling across lush green quads, laughing in sun-drenched study halls. It was a different world, one he desperately wanted to be a part of. The only way in was with a full scholarship. The application process was a gauntlet of essays and forms, each one feeling more crucial than the last. He poured his soul into his personal statement, writing about his life not as a tale of woe, but as a testament to resilience and hard work. He wrote about the lessons his mother had taught him without ever saying a word, about the wisdom he found in the library books, and about the fire that burned inside him, a desire to not just succeed but to inspire. The wait was the hardest part. Every day the mail seemed to move in slow motion. He'd rush downstairs after school, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, only to be met with junk mail and bills. His mother would watch him, her face a mask of practiced neutrality, unwilling to let her hopes show lest they be crushed. One afternoon, a thick, white envelope with the Northwestern University crest arrived. It was too heavy to be a rejection letter. He picked it up with shaking hands, the world around him seemingly fading into a dull, muffled hum. His sister, 10 years old and with a wisdom beyond her years, saw his fear. "Open it, Lydia," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He tore into the envelope, the crisp paper making a sound like a starting pistol. He unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning for a single word. And then he saw it. Not just a word, but a phrase that seemed to shimmer on the page: full scholarship. He read it again and then again, a smile slowly spreading across his face so wide it felt like it might split his face in two. He looked up at his mother, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he saw her shoulders relax. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, and in that moment, he knew he had made her proud. He had done it. The gate to a new world was finally open. The symphony of noise outside faded into irrelevance. All that mattered was the quiet, resounding victory inside his heart. The campus of Northwestern University was a world away from the cracked pavement of Elijah's neighborhood. It was a place of sweeping green lawns, ivy-covered brick buildings, and the shimmering blue expanse of Lake Michigan. The air, crisp and clean, smelled of cut grass and possibility, a stark contrast to the city's industrial exhaust. He arrived with one worn duffel bag and a backpack stuffed with books, a solitary figure amidst a flurry of moving vans and bustling parents. While his new classmates unloaded designer luggage and high-end electronics, he simply carried his few possessions into his dorm room, the full weight of his scholarship both a blessing and a burden. It had opened the door, but it had not erased the distance between him and this new reality. The first few weeks were a blur of new experiences and social hurdles. He was brilliant in class, a natural in the lecture halls where complex theories and historical nuances came alive. His mind, honed by years of self-study and a relentless drive, absorbed information like a dry sponge. Professors noticed him immediately, impressed not just by his intellect but by his earnest hunger for knowledge. He was at the top of every class, his perfect scores and insightful questions setting him apart. However, outside the classroom, a different story unfolded. Conversations among his peers felt like a foreign language. They spoke of gap years in Europe, of family trips to ski resorts, and of summer internships that were more about connections than qualifications. He had nothing to contribute to these casual boasts. When they asked what he did over the summer, he'd find himself fumbling for words, the simple truth of working at a grocery store and tutoring kids feeling inadequate and out of place. He would often retreat, finding solace in the library's hushed stacks, where the only status that mattered was a thirst for knowledge. He eventually fell into a group of friends, drawn together by a shared class and academic ambition. There was Mark, a lanky and perpetually stressed economics major from a family of lawyers, Chloe, a bubbly history student with an infectious laugh and an effortlessly stylish wardrobe, and Ben, a quiet computer science prodigy who seemed to exist in a world of his own. They were polite to him, inviting him to study groups and late-night pizza runs. But beneath the surface the dynamic was strained. They respected his intelligence, often relying on him to explain difficult concepts or proofread their papers, but there was an unspoken boundary, a subtle difference in social standing that kept them from ever truly connecting. Elijah was a curiosity to them, an outlier. They were fascinated by his background in a way that felt more like academic study than genuine interest. "You must be so resilient," Chloe had said once, her tone well-meaning but detached. "I can't imagine what that must have been like." He had smiled and nodded, offering a vague, generic response, but he felt the sting of her words. He wasn't a case study, he was a person. Yet, he couldn't deny that his life was a mystery to them, and he had no desire to demystify it. He kept his stories short and his past a closed book. Over the next 4 years, this strange, symbiotic relationship continued. They were his only real social circle on campus, a fragile tether to the university's social life. He went to their parties, standing on the edges, observing more than participating. He would listen to their plans for summer internships and post-graduation trips, a quiet observer in their vibrant, privileged lives. His own plans were simple: find a good job, pay off any remaining debt, and help his mother. His success was for them, the family who had sacrificed for him, not for the people who saw him as a footnote to their own stories. His senior year was a whirlwind of finals, job applications, and the bittersweet realization that his time at Northwestern was ending. He had done what he set out to do, graduating with top honors. His academic success was an unshakable fortress, a source of pride that no one could take away. But as graduation day neared, the social chasm felt wider than ever. The friends he had studied with for years were now discussing their final plans. Mark was going on a celebratory trip to the Maldives, Ben had a job lined up at a prestigious tech firm in Silicon Valley, and Chloe was embarking on a month-long trip through Italy. Then came the invitation. It arrived via a group chat, a formal invite to a graduation party at Ben's family mansion. It was a lavish affair with a dress code of formal cocktail. Elijah saw the message and felt a familiar pang of anxiety. He considered saying no, feigning sickness or a prior engagement, but a part of him felt a pull to go. He had to finish this chapter to see it through to the end. The invitation, in its impersonal digital form, felt like an obligation, an act of politeness to a brilliant mind they were ready to leave behind. He replied with a simple, "I'll be there," and closed his laptop, unaware that this one night would be the event that changed everything. The invitation sat on his desk, a sleek black card with embossed silver lettering. It announced a graduation party for the ages, a final, gilded send-off for the class of 24. The address was a sprawling estate on the North Shore, a part of town Elijah had only ever seen in magazines. The formal cocktail dress code was a silent test, a social gauntlet he felt ill-equipped to run. He had been a guest in their academic world for 4 years, but tonight he was entering their social domain. He knew his friends had extended the invitation out of a sense of obligation, a final polite gesture to the brilliant but awkward scholar they were about to leave behind. Despite the gnawing anxiety, a stubborn part of him felt a need to go. He had earned his place here just as much as they had. He would not hide. Elijah decided that for tonight he would not be the quiet, fading figure. He would stand tall, proud of his accomplishments, and hold his head high. With that resolve, he went to his closet. Hanging neatly on a wire hanger was his one truly nice suit, a crisp, navy blue number he had purchased from a thrift store and had expertly tailored with the last of his summer savings. It was his armor, a symbol of his hard-won success. He reached for it, his fingers brushing against the empty hanger. A cold wave of panic washed over him. He frantically sifted through the other clothes, a meager collection of worn t-shirts and faded jeans, but the suit was gone. He scoured the small closet, tossing aside hangers, his heart pounding against his ribs. It was nowhere. He remembered loaning it to his roommate, a well-meaning but often careless engineering student, for a job interview a week ago. He had been so focused on his final exams that he hadn't thought to ask for it back. A quick text to his roommate confirmed his fear. The roommate had accidentally left it at the dry cleaners and it wouldn't be ready until next week. A familiar resignation settled over Elijah's shoulders. The universe, it seemed, had a way of reminding him of his place. He was left with a single, unappealing option, the suit he had worn to his high school graduation. It was a charcoal gray two-button monstrosity that fit him like a hand-me-down from an older, stockier relative. The pants were too long, bunched at the ankles, and the sleeves were awkwardly short. The fabric, shiny with age, felt coarse against his skin. It was the antithesis of formal cocktail. He looked at his reflection in the full-length mirror, a grimace on his face. He looked like an imposter, a kid playing dress-up in his father's clothes. He briefly considered calling an Uber and spending the night in the quiet of his room, but the stubborn pride he had just unearthed refused to be buried. He would go. He would face the music. He would show them that he was more than his clothes. He put on the ill-fitting suit, tied the cheap knot of his only tie, and headed out into the night. Ben's family mansion was a fortress of privilege. As the Uber turned up a long, winding driveway, Elijah saw a landscape of manicured hedges, cascading fountains, and a grand entrance with towering pillars. Valets in matching uniforms were parking a parade of luxury cars, gleaming sedans, sleek sports cars, and imposing SUVs. He felt a sudden, profound sense of inadequacy. He paid the driver and stepped out onto the gravel driveway, his worn dress shoes making a soft scraping sound. The air, filled with the aroma of expensive perfume and blooming jasmine, felt charged with an energy he couldn't place. He walked past the line of luxury cars, his old suit a drab island in a sea of vibrant designer outfits. He saw Mark, Chloe, and Ben standing near the entrance, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of garden lights. They were the perfect image of a successful graduating class. Chloe in a flowing silk gown, Mark in a tailored suit that hugged his frame, and Ben in a custom tuxedo, a look of effortless confidence on his face. Their smiles were wide, their laughter genuine, a sound that felt entirely foreign to him. When they saw him, their smiles faltered. A brief, almost imperceptible moment of silence hung in the air, a quick exchange of glances that Elijah was all too familiar with. It was the look of polite surprise, a look that said, "Oh, you actually came." Ben recovered first, a forced smile on his lips as he came forward to shake Elijah's hand. "Hey man, you made it," he said, his eyes flicking down to Elijah's suit and back up. "Glad you could come." The words were an obligatory courtesy, a final punctuation to their 4-year relationship. Chloe gave him a quick air kiss on the cheek, her perfume a dizzying aroma, and then moved on, already distracted by the arrival of another guest. Elijah retreated into the crowd, seeking refuge in the shadows. He saw faces he recognized from classes and study groups, but no one made a move to approach him. He stood alone in a corner, holding a plastic cup of lemonade, an anachronism at a party where champagne was being served in crystal flutes. People walked past, their laughter and conversations a continuous stream of noise, but he felt like he was watching a movie with the sound turned off. The feeling of being an outsider wasn't new, but tonight it was more acute, more painful. He was a piece of the furniture, an awkward fixture in a room full of moving, living people. He saw the subtle glances, the hushed whispers, the polite but firm avoidance. Eventually, hunger drove him towards the buffet table, a long mahogany spread laden with an array of exotic and delicious foods. He felt a pang of guilt just looking at it. It was more food than his family could buy in a month. He grabbed a flimsy paper plate, his fingers sticky from the condensation on his cup, and began to fill it. He was focused, trying to balance a small mountain of shrimp and a piece of chicken, when someone bumped into him from behind. The flimsy plate, overloaded, tilted precariously. Elijah tried to steady it, but his fingers, slick with condensation, lost their grip. The plate slipped from his hands, landing with a loud, wet splat on the polished marble floor. A collective gasp rippled through the nearest cluster of guests, followed by a sudden, jarring silence. He stood there, frozen, staring at the mess. A large, well-dressed student named Chris, whom Elijah knew from a few shared classes, broke the silence. He looked at Elijah's suit, then at the mess on the floor, and let out a single, condescending laugh. "Looks like someone can't even hold their own plate," he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by everyone nearby. "Guess not everyone's used to this kind of food." A few people snickered. Another girl, standing near Chris, said in a stage whisper, "He's still wearing that old thing? I thought he'd at least try to look the part." The words were like a physical blow. The small, private embarrassment of dropping the plate became a public, humiliating spectacle. The quiet murmurs turned into whispers, the whispers into open ridicule. The exclusion he had felt all night was now an active, concerted effort. People who had been cordial moments ago now turned their backs, their faces a mask of polite indifference, not wanting to be associated with him. He was a caricature of his past, a living reminder of the poverty they had only read about in textbooks. He felt his face flush with a mix of shame and rage. He had tried. He had walked into this lion's den with his head held high, only to be torn down for a clumsy mistake in the clothes he wore. The food on the floor looked like the final, shattered pieces of his dignity. He dropped the plastic cup from his hand, the sound a small, insignificant patter against the marble. Without another word, without looking at a single person, he turned and walked away. He walked through the bustling crowd, past the laughter and the sparkling lights, and out the front door. He didn't look back. The sounds of the party faded behind him, swallowed by the quiet of the night. He hailed a cab and sat in the back, staring out the window, his reflection a blurry outline of a man in a cheap suit, a man with nothing but a bruised heart and a simmering, unshakable rage. The graduation party had ended, but a new chapter in his life had just begun. The taxi ride home from the graduation party was a silent, simmering cauldron of emotions. The cheap suit felt like a uniform of humiliation, and the memory of Chris's condescending laugh played on a loop in his mind. But beneath the sting of shame was something else, something deeper and more potent, a cold, hard resolve. The rage that had been a fleeting spark in the mansion's hallway was now a steady, burning flame in his gut. He was tired of being underestimated, of being seen as an exception to a rule he didn't even believe in. The mockery at the party, the years of polite but distant friendships, it all became fuel. He had worked his entire life to earn a seat at their table, only to have the chair pulled out from under him. From this moment on, he would build his own table, one that no one could ever knock over. His professional life began with an almost immediate and brutal education in the realities of the world outside of academia. He had graduated at the top of his class with a perfect GPA, armed with an honors thesis that had been lauded by his professors. His resume was a masterpiece of academic achievement, and he had applied to a number of prestigious companies, from global consultancies to innovative tech firms. He was confident that his record would speak for itself. It did, but not in the way he had hoped. The rejections came in a variety of forms. Some were the polite, generic emails that offered no explanation. Others were more personal, wrapped in thinly veiled euphemisms. One recruiter from a major financial firm, after a brief and uncomfortable phone call, left a message that felt like a slap in the face. "Your background is unconventional for our culture," the voice said, "and we feel you wouldn't be a natural fit for our team's dynamics." It was the same coded language he had grown to recognize, a quiet dismissal of his origins, his race, his very existence. He could practically hear the unspoken words, "We don't hire people like you." He went on a string of interviews that were more like interrogations than conversations. The interviewers would praise his academic record with a certain kind of detached curiosity, as if he were a rare, exotic bird. They would then pivot to questions about his social fit, his soft skills, and his ability to connect with clients, all areas where his lack of a privileged upbringing was seen as a deficit. One interviewer, a man in an expensive suit with a too-perfect smile, spent the entire meeting talking about his own alma mater and the networking connections he had made there. He didn't ask a single substantive question about Elijah's experience or his ideas. The rejection email arrived 2 hours later. The humiliation and frustration were a daily companion. He saw his less qualified friends, the ones who had struggled in classes, landing jobs at top-tier firms thanks to family connections and social pedigrees. He felt a profound sense of injustice, a crushing realization that the meritocracy he had believed in was a lie. He was about to give up, to settle for a local, unfulfilling job, when an email from a small, relatively unknown company caught his eye. Aegis Innovations was a small-scale data analytics company with a client base of regional tech firms. Their office was located in a converted warehouse, a world away from the gleaming downtown high-rises he had been interviewing in. He went in for the interview with a new sense of quiet defiance. This time he didn't try to fit in. He was simply himself. He spoke about his passion for data, the way he saw patterns and solutions where others saw only noise. The interviewers, two tired but sharp-eyed programmers in t-shirts, seemed to listen to him, truly listen. They asked him about his ideas, not his social life. They gave him a complex problem to solve on the spot, and he worked through it, his mind humming with a purpose he hadn't felt in weeks. He left the building not with a sense of hope, but with a quiet understanding that this was a place where he could finally be judged on the content of his character, not the color of his skin or the threads on his suit. He got the job. He started as an entry-level data analyst, a cog in a large machine. He came in early and stayed late. He didn't complain about the tedious work, he simply did it better than anyone else. Within weeks, he had streamlined processes that had taken other analysts months to master. He began to see larger patterns, inefficiencies that weren't in his job description. He noticed that a particular client, a growing e-commerce company, was wasting a significant portion of its marketing budget on a demographic that was statistically unlikely to convert. He took it upon himself to create a detailed report, complete with a novel algorithm he had designed in his spare time, and presented it to his manager. His manager, a gruff but fair man named David, was stunned. He had never seen such a level of initiative or insight from an entry-level employee. Elijah was immediately given more responsibility, a small team to manage and the freedom to work on his own projects. He quickly proved himself to be a natural leader, not with charisma but with quiet competence. He spoke with the data, his solutions always backed by irrefutable facts and elegant logic. He never raised his voice, never sought the spotlight. He simply delivered results, consistently and brilliantly. He rose through the ranks with dizzying speed. Within a year he was heading a new division, one that focused on predictive analytics for Fortune 500 companies. His name became synonymous with groundbreaking results within the company. He had a reputation for being a quiet genius, a man who could solve any problem with data alone. The board, a group of seasoned veterans, began to take notice. His ascent was fueled by merit, his work speaking for him in a way his background never could. The ill-fitting suit was long gone, replaced by a meticulously tailored wardrobe that felt like a second skin. He wasn't trying to fit in anymore. He was simply dressing for the part he had earned. 4 years to the day from his college graduation, the current CEO, a respected industry veteran, announced his retirement. The news rippled through the company, sparking a flurry of rumors about who his successor would be. The candidates were all highly qualified, but when the announcement was made, there was no surprise. It was Elijah. The board had seen his vision, his unshakable integrity, and his ability to not only solve problems but to anticipate them. He was not just the best candidate, he was the only one. He stood at the podium, a microphone in his hand, a sleek, tailored suit on his frame, and looked out at the sea of faces, his own calm and composed. The past was a distant echo, a memory of a boy in a cheap suit, but it was that memory, that pain, that had fueled him. The rage had transformed into purpose, the humiliation into an unshakable confidence. He had not just risen, he had soared. 4 years had passed since Elijah had walked out of that mansion, the sound of laughter and the feeling of shame echoing in his ears. In the intervening years, the boy in the ill-fitting suit had become a man, and the man had become a titan. His days were now a whirlwind of high-stakes meetings, international travel, and the weight of a multi-billion-dollar company resting on his shoulders. He lived in a world where data was currency and vision was power. He had built his own table, and it was a formidable one. The invitation arrived in his inbox one Tuesday morning, a digital whisper from a life that felt like a distant dream. The subject line read, Northwestern University Reunion. He clicked it, a flicker of curiosity stirring within him. The invite was a polished, modern version of the one from 4 years ago, with the same list of hosts: Mark, Chloe, and Ben. The reunion was to be held at the same lakeside mansion, a deliberate attempt to recapture the magic of their final college party. The dress code was once again formal cocktail. A wry smile touched Elijah's lips. It was an invitation to a stage he had once been forced to leave, and a part of him, the part that had never fully healed from that night, wanted to see the final act through. His personal assistant, a meticulous and efficient woman named Sarah, had already cleared his schedule. "You're confirmed for the reunion, Mr. Jackson," she said, her voice a calm counterpoint to his buzzing thoughts. "The car will be ready at 8. He nodded, his mind already drifting to the details of the party. He hadn't given a thought to his attire. He had a walk-in closet filled with suits, each one a testament to the life he had built. He found himself thinking about that old, worn-out suit from his past, the one that had been a silent accomplice in his humiliation. It was a ghost he carried with him, a reminder of the fire that had forged him. Tonight he would lay that ghost to rest. Elijah's preparation was a silent, powerful ritual. He did not frantically search for a forgotten garment. He walked to his closet and surveyed his options, a gallery of bespoke tailoring. He chose a single-breasted charcoal gray suit, its fabric a luxurious blend of wool and cashmere. It was a suit that commanded attention without shouting for it. The shirt was a crisp, pure white, and the silk tie was a deep, iridescent burgundy. The cufflinks were simple silver, the shoes, Italian leather polished to a mirror sheen, were a perfect fit. When he looked at his reflection, he did not see the awkward boy of 4 years ago. He saw a man who was calm, composed, and in control. This suit was not armor, it was simply a part of him, an extension of his quiet confidence. The journey to the mansion was a world away from the last time. He sat in the back of a luxury sedan, the leather seats soft and comfortable. His driver navigated the winding roads, the car gliding silently through the night. As they turned up the familiar, sweeping driveway, Elijah saw the same parade of luxury cars, a different vintage but the same kind of display of wealth. This time he was a part of it. He felt no sense of inadequacy, only a quiet sense of homecoming. The car pulled up to the main entrance and the valet, a young man in a crisp uniform, opened the door for him. Elijah stepped out, the gravel crunching softly under his expensive shoes, the scent of expensive perfume and blooming jasmine filling the air. He walked past the line of luxury cars, not as a drab island, but as a striking silhouette against the backdrop of the mansion's illuminated grandeur. He walked with a purpose and an easy, fluid confidence. The party was in full swing. Music, a thumping blend of current hits and nostalgic college anthems, spilled from the open doors. Laughter and conversation filled the air, and a sea of faces vaguely familiar swirled around him. He took it all in, a quiet observer. He spotted his former friends first. They were standing in a tight cluster near a towering ice sculpture, drinks in their hands. They looked a little older, a little more weathered by the corporate world, but the core of them was the same. Mark still had that anxious, perpetually stressed look. Chloe was still the center of attention, her laugh echoing across the room. Ben, a little heavier, still had that air of effortless confidence. Elijah watched them, a strange sense of detachment in his heart. It wasn't anger he felt, but a quiet, almost scholarly curiosity. He wondered if they would recognize him. He began to walk toward them, not rushing, just moving with a calm deliberation that was so fundamentally different from his past self. As he drew closer, a few people in his path did a double take. They saw the expensive suit, the confident posture, and the familiar face. Whispers started to ripple through the crowd, a quiet buzz of recognition. "Is that Elijah?" a voice said, a note of disbelief in their tone. "No way, that's not him," another said. When Elijah was a few feet away, Ben, who was in the middle of a joke, happened to glance over. His laughter died in his throat. His eyes, which had been sparkling with amusement, widened. He stared at Elijah, a look of profound shock and confusion on his face. He nudged Mark, his hand trembling slightly. Mark, mid-sip of his drink, followed Ben's gaze. The glass froze halfway to his lips and his face went white. Finally, Chloe, sensing the sudden shift in the mood, turned. The smile that had been on her face for the past hour vanished completely. She looked at Elijah, then at Ben, then back at Elijah, as if trying to reconcile the elegant man before her with the awkward boy from 4 years ago. The silence that fell over the group was deafening. It was as if someone had turned off the sound. The years of polite indifference, the subtle slights, the open mockery, it all came rushing back, a tidal wave of shared memory. They saw the impeccable suit, the effortless confidence, the man who had been a joke 4 years ago and was now an undeniable success. Their faces, once filled with carefree laughter, were now a complex tapestry of shock, awe, and dawning regret. The humiliation he had felt that night had been a private shame. Their collective, stunned silence was a public reckoning. Elijah simply stood there waiting. The silence that had fallen over the group was so profound it seemed to have a physical weight, pressing in on them from all sides. Ben, Chloe, and Mark stood frozen, their faces a pale mosaic of shock and dawning realization. It was Ben who finally broke the spell, his composure cracking under the strain. He took a small step forward, his hand raising in a tentative, almost pleading gesture. "Elijah? I can't believe it's you," he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. His eyes darted from Elijah's face to his suit, a frantic attempt to reconcile the two images. "You look incredible. We've been trying to find you. We had no idea what happened to you after graduation. You just disappeared." His words were a clumsy dance around the elephant in the room. He didn't mention the party, the old suit, or the moment of his own mockery. He was trying to build a bridge over a chasm of his own making, and the planks were splintering. Mark stepped forward next, a nervous tick in his cheek. "Yeah man, it's great to see you. We heard you. You were doing well for yourself." His gaze was fixed on a point just over Elijah's shoulder, unable to meet his eyes. We were a bunch of idiots back then. I mean, we were just kids, you know? Not that it's an excuse or anything, but, well, you know." He trailed off, his apology as hollow as it was inarticulate. He was offering a generic mea culpa for an unspoken sin. It was a flimsy attempt to absolve himself without ever admitting the specific, painful details. Chloe, ever the most poised, tried to inject a note of warmth and sincerity. She moved toward him, a soft, practiced smile on her face. "Elijah, you have to forgive us. That night was a blur. We were all a bit overwhelmed. I'm so sorry about how everything went down. She placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of practiced empathy that felt utterly foreign. We're all so proud of you. I mean, look at you. You've really done it. Her words were a subtle shift of the narrative. She wasn't just apologizing, she was now trying to take credit for his success, to imply that they had always believed in him. It was a sickeningly sweet display, a performance for the benefit of the surrounding guests who were now all watching with rapt attention. Elijah listened, his expression unreadable. He felt no anger, no triumph, only a quiet, dispassionate observation. He was seeing them for who they truly were, stripped of the pretense and privilege that had once defined them. They were not malicious monsters. They were simply people who had never been forced to look beyond their own comfortable bubbles. Their apologies were not for what they had done to him, but for what his success now revealed about them. They were apologizing for their own inadequacy. The quiet buzz in the room had grown into a collective murmur. People from other parts of the party had begun to notice the silent drama unfolding. Word was spreading. That's Elijah Jackson, the CEO of Aegis Innovations. He went here? I can't believe it. He was at our graduation party 4 years ago. The whispers were a constant, a symphony of revelation. Elijah saw the same faces that had turned away from him 4 years ago now looking at him with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. He was no longer a joke, a living caricature. He was a symbol, a beacon of what they hadn't become. He had a choice. He could walk away, leaving them in their pool of regret. He could deliver a cutting, personal rebuke, a final moment of vindication. But as he looked at their faces, at the dawning fear and shame, he realized that a personal victory wasn't enough. He had a larger story to tell, a truth to speak that went beyond the confines of their small, privileged circle. He saw not just his past, but the universal truth of what it meant to be an outsider. The humiliation he had felt was not his alone. It was a shared burden of every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. He took a slow, deliberate breath. Ben, Mark, Chloe, he said, his voice a low, steady rumble that cut through the noise. His voice was calm, not filled with anger, but with an immense, quiet power. He looked at each of them in the eye, and for the first time they flinched. I appreciate the sentiment. And I hear you. The past is the past. A ripple of relief passed through them, a visible slumping of their shoulders. But Elijah wasn't done. He looked out at the larger crowd, the sea of faces watching him. He saw a few of the people who had laughed that night. He saw the face of Chris, the man who had mocked him, standing in a corner, his face pale and his eyes wide with disbelief. This was his stage now, his moment. He began to walk toward the center of the room, toward a small raised platform where a DJ had his equipment. The music, a thumping beat from 4 years ago, had been turned down, a quiet, expectant hum filling the air. He stepped onto the platform, his confident posture a stark contrast to his nervous, clumsy departure 4 years ago. He held up a hand, and the murmuring in the room instantly died down. He looked out at the silent sea of people, at the faces filled with curiosity and apprehension, and began to speak. Thank you all for being here, he said, his voice projected through the speaker system, clear and resonant. It's surreal to be standing here. 4 years ago, I was in this very room at a very different point in my life. I was a graduate, full of hope and a whole lot of fear. I was also wearing a suit that was too small, carrying a plate of food I could barely afford, and feeling like an intruder in a world that wasn't meant for me. A ripple of uncomfortable recognition passed through the crowd. He wasn't holding back, he was laying it all out, a stark and brutal memory in a room filled with denial. I remember the feeling of shame when I dropped that plate, he continued, his voice calm and even. The feeling of being watched, of being judged. The feeling of being laughed at, not for a clumsy mistake but for who I was, for where I came from. I remember walking out of here feeling like a failure. Not just a social one but a personal one. I believed for a moment that the world I had worked so hard to enter was not for people like me. I was wrong. He paused, letting his words hang in the air, a final punctuation to the past. He looked out at the faces, their initial shock giving way to a more complex emotion. Some looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Others, a few, seemed to look at him with a glimmer of understanding. He saw the first signs of genuine empathy, the first sign of a connection that went beyond the superficial. The room was his now. The story was his to tell. He was no longer Elijah the student or Elijah the outcast or Elijah the CEO. He was just Elijah, and he was about to tell them his story, a story of rejection, resilience, and the true cost of being an outsider. Elijah stood at the microphone, the polished metal cool against his fingers. The soft hum of the sound system was the only thing that broke the silence. He looked out at the faces before him, a sea of former peers, now all watching with bated breath. He felt no anger, no urge for revenge. The pain of 4 years ago had been alchemized into something else entirely, a quiet, unshakable strength. This was not a moment for settling scores, it was a moment for telling a story. "Thank you all for this moment," he began, his voice clear and resonant. "4 years ago, I stood in this very room at the end of a journey that had consumed my life. I had, in my mind, achieved everything I set out to. I had overcome my circumstances, excelled in my studies, and earned a place at an institution that felt like a fairy tale. I truly believed in the simple, elegant idea that merit would be rewarded. That hard work, talent, and dedication were the only currency that mattered." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. They had all been raised with that same narrative, but for them, it was a given, not an ideal they had to fight for. "That night," he continued, "I was wearing the best suit I owned. It was old, but it was clean. It was a suit that had seen me through every interview, every presentation, and every victory. To me, it represented my journey, every late night, every scholarship application, every sacrifice. But to some, it was just an old suit. It was a sign of a world they did not know, a world that was foreign and therefore a target for ridicule. When I dropped my plate, it wasn't just food hitting the floor. It was my world colliding with theirs, and the moment was met with laughter. The message was clear. My achievements were not enough to bridge the gap between our worlds. I was, and always would be, an outsider." A collective gasp, soft and regretful, rippled through the crowd. He saw Chloe's hand come up to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. Ben looked down at the floor, his face etched with a mix of shame and sorrow. Mark simply stood there, stunned into silence. Elijah hadn't named names, but he didn't have to. The truth was a sharp, brilliant light that illuminated the entire room. "I left that night feeling a kind of humiliation I had never known," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "But that feeling, that pain, became the most powerful force in my life. It was a furnace. It burned away my naive belief in a simple meritocracy. It taught me that the world, even after a full scholarship and a 4.0 GPA, was not a place of open doors. After graduation, I applied for jobs and was rejected, not for my lack of qualifications, but because of a cultural fit I could not provide. I was told my background was unconventional, and that I wouldn't be a natural fit for their teams. These were polite, sanitized words for a deeper, more insidious prejudice. And every rejection, every condescending dismissal, was a reminder of that night here." He looked directly at the back of the room at Chris, who was now staring at him, utterly transfixed. Chris's face was a mask of disbelief. "I realized that the only path forward was to build my own," Elijah stated, his voice now gaining a powerful resonance. "I stopped looking for a door to be opened for me. I began building a house. I found a company that didn't care about where I came from, only where I could take them. I worked with a purpose fueled by a single, simple goal: to prove not to you but to myself that a person's worth is not defined by their clothes, their money, or their social connections. It is defined by their character, their resilience, and their ability to stand up after they've been knocked down." He took a final, deep breath, his hands resting on the podium. The entire room was silent, every eye fixed on him. "I'm not here tonight to settle a score," he said, his voice softening. "I'm here to tell you that the world is bigger than this room. The world is full of people who are just like the boy I was that night. People with immense talent and a quiet dignity that will never be reflected in their bank account or the clothes they wear. They are often overlooked. They are often judged. But if you give them a chance, if you see them for who they are and not what they have, they will not only surprise you. They will change your world." He stepped away from the microphone, the silence in the room hanging thick and heavy. For a long moment, no one moved. Then one by one, people began to clap. It started as a trickle, a few soft claps from the back of the room, but it quickly swelled into a thunderous, standing ovation. The applause was not just for the CEO. It was for the man, for his courage, and for the story he had just told. Ben, Chloe, and Mark were no longer a cohesive group. They stood apart, each of them lost in their own thoughts. When the applause began to die down, they moved toward him, a new look of genuine humility on their faces. "Elijah," Ben began, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "We didn't know." Chloe simply hugged him, a gesture that was not performative this time, but born of a profound, heartbroken regret. "I'm so ashamed," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Mark just shook his head, a single genuine tear tracing a path down his cheek. "You're a better man than I am, Elijah," he said, his voice raw. "A far better man." Elijah gave them a small, compassionate smile. "It's okay," he said. He didn't mean it as a dismissal but as a truth. It was okay. The pain was gone. It had been replaced by a sense of profound peace. He had said what he needed to say, not for them but for himself. He had come back to the place of his greatest humiliation and had found, not revenge but a quiet, powerful form of grace. As the night wore on, countless people approached him, their faces a mix of awe and apology. He had become an icon, a symbol of what was possible, and a living reminder of the consequences of prejudice. He had entered the party as a ghost from the past and had left as a man who had finally, truly found his place in the world. He had come full circle. The thunderous applause eventually subsided, leaving a charged silence in its wake. The crowd, once a collective of strangers and half-forgotten faces, now looked at Elijah with a new light of understanding. He had not just spoken. He had laid bare a piece of the human condition they had never truly had to face. People began to filter forward, their expressions a mix of admiration, empathy, and shame. A woman he vaguely remembered from a history class approached him. "Elijah," she said, her voice soft and a little shaky. "I was there that night. I saw what happened. I'm so sorry. I didn't say anything. I should have." He gave her a small, kind smile. "You're saying something now," he replied, and her eyes filled with tears as she thanked him and moved on. The apologies came in a steady stream, from people who had laughed, from people who had simply watched, from people who had been too caught up in their own worlds to notice. He accepted each one with grace, no longer needing them, but understanding the weight they carried for the people offering them. He was a mirror, and in his reflection they were seeing their own missed opportunities for kindness. Ben, Chloe, and Mark stood a little distance away watching the procession. Their earlier apologies, clumsy and self-serving, now seemed like a distant memory. They had seen the true cost of his resilience, and the sight was humbling. Elijah finished his conversations and walked over to them. The public spectacle was over. This was for them. "We messed up, Elijah," Ben said, his voice stripped of its usual bravado. "Big time." "We were so blind," Chloe added, her voice a whisper. "We didn't see you. We only saw what we wanted to see." Elijah nodded. "I know," he said simply. There was no need for more words. The apology was accepted, not with grand gestures, but with the quiet acknowledgement that they had, at last, truly seen him. He felt the weight of the moment lift. The air in the room, once thick with tension, now felt light and breathable. He had said all he needed to say. He had fulfilled his purpose for returning. He was no longer the boy who needed their validation, nor was he the man who needed their apology. He was simply himself. He gave a final, genuine smile and turned toward the exit. No one tried to stop him. This was not the same kind of departure as 4 years ago. That night he had fled. Tonight he was walking away in peace. He had come to confront a ghost, and had found a kind of closure that felt more like a fresh start. He slid into the back of his car, the silent hum of the engine a welcome relief after the cacophony of the party. The driver, a kind man named Arthur, waited for the address. Elijah leaned back against the plush leather and simply said, "Let's drive for a bit, Arthur. Take the long way home." The car glided through the cool night air. The city lights began to blur into a soft, golden river outside the window. As he watched the world go by, Elijah's mind began to unravel the tangled threads of the night. He thought about the old suit and the new one. The old suit had been a symbol of his poverty, a beacon of his outsider status. The new one was a symbol of his success, a testament to his hard work. But the real difference wasn't the fabric or the fit. It was what they represented. The old suit had been a burden he carried, a uniform of his shame. The new one was a choice, a reflection of a confidence that came from within, not from the approval of others. He thought about the laughter that had followed him out of the mansion 4 years ago. The laughter had been cruel and thoughtless, but it had also been the fuel he needed. It had been the sound of the world telling him he didn't belong, and in response, he had built a world where he could not only belong but thrive. The years of rejection, the subtle racism in the corporate world, the relentless grind, all of it had been a testament to that night. He had been running from that laughter, and it had pushed him to heights he might never have reached otherwise. And now, the laughter was gone, replaced by respectful silence and a genuine applause. The need for vindication had vanished. The anger, once a quiet, simmering ember in his heart, had finally gone out. He felt free. The pain was no longer a defining part of his identity. It was a memory, a lesson, a foundation on which he had built his life. He realized the true victory wasn't becoming a CEO or owning the suit, or even in the apologies. The victory was in his ability to look at those people, at the very people who had once laughed at his pain, and feel nothing but a quiet sense of compassion. He had forgiven them not because they deserved it, but because he deserved to be free of the burden of that anger. He was the one who was truly rich, not with money, but with the profound peace of knowing his worth had never been tied to the opinions of others. The car turned onto his street, a quiet, tree-lined avenue that felt a world away from the noise and opulence of the reunion. The familiar hum of his home's security system was the only thing that greeted him. He walked through the front door, the silence of his home a soothing balm. He looked at his reflection in the hallway mirror. He saw the elegant suit, the determined set of his jaw, the deep, knowing calm in his eyes. He had come full circle. He had gone from a boy who had nothing to a man who had everything he could ever want, and in the end, he had found that the most valuable possession was the peace he had made with his past. He wasn't a product of his circumstances. He was a creator of his own destiny. The journey was over, but a new, more meaningful one was just beginning. He had found his place in the world, and it was a place he had built for himself, brick by agonizing, beautiful brick. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.